recording.
You're waiting.
Hey.
You mute everyone?
Yes. Oh, well, you want to mute the lines now, Diane? Okay, great. Lines are muted. Just give us a signal when you want them open.
Yeah, okay. Let's moment so that we can get, anyway, hi everybody. Gosh, it's been a long time since we've been together, and I'm really glad that we have this opportunity not only to be together, but to refresh our technical skills. So I'll say welcome to you, and we're going to have a fun day. We're talking about clinical education, effective practices and partnerships, as you know, and we have two guest speakers who I'm going to introduce in just a second. Here's our usual reminders. We're going to, keep lines muted and unless we ask to have them open. When you ask a question, raise your hand, and everybody should know where that little hand signal is. It's bottom of the participant list on the far left, so that you can you're able to see it. And if you click on that, then your hand will be raised. We'll be doing two polling questions, maybe three. So click just two. I won't panic, Farrell. And so click on your screen. We have the polling questions, and if you have tech problems, there's the number to call in. And some of you also are using that Q&A function down at the bottom. So if you want to do that, and before we go any further, I want to introduce you to Farrell Cornrick. He is our new tech support. He's fabulous. We've already had him helping us solve some pre-conference technical problems, and you can see how nicely he's worked with us to get us all to this point. So thank you. And, of course, Nick is here with us today, too, and Nick is a man of many skills, and he also has these fabulous technical skills. So we're pleased everybody here to help make this a successful experience. So I'm thinking that everybody's kind of pulled together. Some of you are at a site yourself. Others of you are together with a faculty member, or maybe just together a bunch of students. So let's kind of gather together here. And I like to start our sessions with the good news. And it's been a while since we've been together, so surely we've got some fabulous news to share, something that we would love to celebrate, or something that you want us to be wishing you well because you've submitted an abstract and you want positive vibes coming toward you. So let's open the lines here, and everybody keep your site quiet, and let's share some good news. Let's get started off with a bang here.
Lines are open.
So, anybody would like to have some news there?
Yes.
Sam?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I passed my certified nurse educator exam a month ago.
Oh, congratulations.
It was hard.
Yes, that's wonderful, and what a nice role you are. Always, and for all of us, really. So it's a really honor. So congratulations. And I think everybody probably knows about the nurse educator certification, and that's it's relatively new for us here as nurses. So,
I just want. This is Paula, and I'm getting a clicking noise over the line that makes it very difficult to hear.
Okay. Well, then let's do this. Let's mute things again, and I'll call on people. Let's do that.
Okay.
Okay, that's there for everybody. So, Kathleen, go ahead and do I need to give Kathleen permission here? Nick?
Okay, article was accepted by the Advanced Emergency Nursing Journal and should be coming out sometime like April or May of this year.
Oh, congratulations. Doesn't it feel good to be accepted?
Yes, it is.
Yes, well, that's a milestone and an accomplishment. Well, we'll look for it. Hey, and Marianne, can you share some good news with us, Marianne McDermott?
Yes. The scholars from Rutgers and from Seton Hall
met together as a group, which is a first, for one, that the universities collaborated so well, and all of the scholars met at Rutgers for a working lunch, and to share a lot of experiences. And I just think that it's a milestone, and we're going to continue this. And we have another meeting set up for June.
Oh, fabulous. Well, that's what this ANI is all about, and the CLC too, so good start. Anybody else? Have I asked anybody? Okay, I don't know. Our guest speakers, I'll call on Angie McNellis. Go, Angie.
Well, I was just going to share some exciting news. Actually, I've had 2 grants funded recently that we're going to really start looking at what's going on in terms of teaching and learning at the clinical sites. Because that I will share with you as we talk about clinical practices based on a survey that we did. We really don't know that. So really excited to do a study, and I am very left-brained, and this is going to be a right-brain study, and it's qualitative, so I'm learning new skills on these 2 grants, but very excited to do those.
Well, congratulations, and we can get funding for doing nursing education research. This is something that we really need to be proud of and congratulate each other, because we're still, as you said, evolving the evidence here, and we'll look forward to seeing results. And I know you've done a lot of evidence generation and a lot of publications, so we'll look forward to seeing more. And anybody else want to share any good news at this moment?
This is Paula, and we actually got the first round of approval for 2 RWJ grants. One is an EIN grant. We're now we've been invited to submit a full proposal, and for that grant, we're going to study our 13 campuses that are involved in our consortium related to simulation, and take a stab at establishing some best practices for using simulation in clinical learning. So we're busy at work with that next, writing that full proposal, but we're excited about the possibilities.
Oh, great. Well, congratulations. And you people in Oregon are models of getting grants. I know when we see one of your slides coming up, we're going to see where your funding sources have come from, and just what it takes to be able to get all the work that we need to be done is, to have people who can write like you and Angie, and then the funders who are willing to support us. So what a nice example to share. Thanks. And Nick? Yeah, go ahead.
So good news for us as a program is that, we had an abstract accepted to the NLN conference for this year.
Oh.
So I'll be there, making sure that we look awesome.
Yeah, I'll be there, and we're, going to be putting together the panel and actually the nice part of that abstract is it's for 45 minutes, which is a real plus at a big conference like the National League for Nursing Summit. So we'll be keeping everybody informed as to how that unfolds. So thanks for...
And definitely picking some brains and asking for their thoughts.
Well,
it's a really good opportunity for us, I think.
Absolutely, turning into a fabulous project here, and we want to showcase it and put New Jersey on the map here with being excellent with their faculty preparation and their good clinical teaching. So it's great. Oh, now?
Yes, and I just wanted to let the program directors that are on the call know that I'll be following up with them with some information very soon about an upcoming program development webinar and some site visits. So we're going to come to the great work that you've been doing at your individual sites. So stay tuned for that.
Okay, thank you. Kind of leads us into announcements, and I'll take a moment to add my 2 cents on a couple of these. One is to alert you to a journal article. Every time I put the reading list together, about 2 weeks after I do, there's many articles on the topic, but there's a wonderful article, actually it's an editorial from Christine Tanner in the Journal of Nursing Education in January. The title of it is From Duck to Mother Load, Clinical Education for Deep Learning. And it really inspires and kind of synthesizes all the things we're going to be talking about today. And as that, you will notice that our 2 guest speakers, their work is quoted heavily in this editorial. So actually there's quite a few articles related to the topic for today. And in fact, the whole issue is on clinical education. So if you can pick up just one journal, this would be the one due January 2010. So that's one thing. We'll say it again at the end here, but our next meeting is April 16th from 10 to 2 at the Foundation. So be sure that that's on your calendar. And at that time, we're going to be doing some evaluation of the CLC. So be thinking about what's working, what you want to see done differently, and be sure to share that forward. And I'm going to make a couple of quick comments about the discussion forum while I still have everybody's attention and before we get busy here at the end. As you know, in this forum, I've been trying to use a variety of different teaching strategies so you can see, a little bit more about online teaching. And the strategy for this topic is a debate. We've done Robin and we've done critical reflection. So this one's a debate. So take a peek not only at what your assignment, but how the debate is set up and structured and how it plays out. And some of you have been in there already and posted. And what I've learned over the years is that people who get in there first set the bar. And the bar has been set very high here. And so this is fun to see. And I'll encourage anybody else to read and participate and see how things are going there. And I want to draw your attention to the fact that the discussion forum really is designed for networking, and more that you can there and kind of see how your colleagues are posting their thoughts, the things that they are contributing, the more networking you're going to be able to do. And discussion forums such as this also are, I'll say, a marketing opportunity. In other words, you're presenting yourself to your colleagues, and you know that we're counting on you to be the future of nursing education in New Jersey. So here's your chance to really get to know each other and kind of see the thinking and what each of you are doing. So I'll lay those 2 ideas as an inspiration for you. Okay, so that's my announcements. Let's tie some things together here because we've now kind of been working along. I'm going to refer us back to Pat Benner. And she, remember when she was with us at the first meeting, she was talking about the various apprenticeships of nursing education, and of course the main one that she talked to us about was the practice apprenticeship. And that's just exactly what we're talking about today. So kind of put our today's discussion in the context of what Dr. Benner was talking to us about. And we've kind of talked a little bit about our students, our learners, and their diversity and all their learning needs. So this is kind of continuing on now, and not only do we need to think about the students' diversity and their learning needs in the classroom, but we need to now think about them in the clinical setting too. So kind of build on what we've discussed already. And then what I'd really like for you to get out of this session is that we are talking with our expert panel here about new models of clinical education and some of the new roles that are coming down the pike. And you'll hear threaded throughout what our guest speakers have to say is the theme of partnerships. And I would love for you to link their thoughts and their examples to the work going on in New Jersey. And I know that you're on the cusp of developing some new models for clinical education there as well. And I know the scholars, when you graduate, are going to be part of some of the new models that are going to be developed and maybe even are participating in the development. And for sure the faculty who are online today, and the rest of the faculty are working in this direction too. So that's kind of what I'd like you to do, all things to pull together. We've got the base we're building on, and we have the future in the context of what's going on in New Jersey. So we'll kind of put all that together. So next, any questions right now before we dive in? And I'll have anybody who would like to ask a question to do so right now. So if you have any burning information before we proceed? Okay. Well, if not, we're going to expect a success because we have technology and we always want to visualize that it's all going to go well, and we're off to a great start. So here we go. And I'm thinking that everybody should be relaxed and set, have the handouts in front of them, and have your minds open and ready to learn. So here we go. Kind of an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. The teaching practices from the CLC survey, the use of simulations in clinical education, some innovative models and designs, and we're going to wrap up with some challenges. And there's 4 and we'll hope we get to them all, but if we don't, they're on the table for you to just think about and to discuss further. So that's the goal today, is to get all this accomplished. And want to reintroduce you to our guest speakers. You've heard from them both, and I couldn't have been more excited to have them say yes when I asked them to participate. We have Dr. Angie McNellis, and she is, as you can see,
just on mute though.
Yeah, she's from Indiana University School of Nursing and has participated in many, many research studies related to nursing education, and has been the NLN Clinical Education Research Project, and she's going to talk with you about it. And then Paula Gabriel from Oregon Health Sciences University, and Paula is the Associate Dean, and she too has been very active in work with new models of clinical education, and you have readings about the Oregon Health and Sciences University, and the talk a little bit about that. So we've got some fabulous speakers and some ideas to put on the table. So with that, we're going to next start talk about clinical teaching practices, and I'm going to just go off script for just a second. I am wondering if we need to do just a quick mini learner analysis here and find out who has not been doing clinical teaching. And I think the easiest way to do this is to have people raise their hand if they have never done any kind of clinical teaching. And we'll consider clinical teaching, being a preceptor, working with new, or also working with students. We have, a pretty big number of people here that have never done clinical teaching. We kind of want to be sure that we're addressing the needs. So it looks like we have, say, 2 or 3 so from this, I'm going to deduce that we have just about everybody, or most of you have done clinical teaching. And if you have not, I suspect you will have an opportunity in your educational program as you come up. Okay, well, looks like maybe now we have 4 or 5 people who have not done clinical teaching, but for sure you will have an opportunity to do it. I know that. Okay, now we have a polling question, a true, actual polling question, and I don't know what we need to do to get this up here, the polling question. Yes, there is, and it should be in your right-hand box, and you can check as many of these as you have done, for those of you who have done clinical teaching, and you can check as many as apply to you. So are these things that you do when you do clinical teaching? And this is kind of in the stage for Angie's discussion, the findings from the NLN survey. Do you work with the students and check them before they get medications? Do you check that they're safe to do so? Do you spend reading the charting? Do you ask questions, students understand the rationale for what they're doing? Do you demonstrate how to do skills? Do you supervise the students? Do you conduct rounds, teaching rounds? A lot of faculty spend a lot of time interacting with the staff and the preceptor. That's another practice. So everyone should be there with the voting poll. I'm going to call for the results in just a minute. We'll give everybody a little longer to respond and check as many of these as you do. Pre and post conference, that's a pretty common clinical teaching practice. And clinical teaching doesn't just begin and end with the view of the student. There's care plans that he reviewed before or after, so there's a lot of prep work with too. So I'm going to think we've given enough time here for everybody to...
Nick, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Nick, you're going to have to take back the host role. It froze on me again.
And you know what I'm going to say is, if we get the results, we can post them at any time, but let's move ahead. And I'm going to move here and turn the slides to Angie, which maybe, Nick, you'll have to do that too if...
Yes, Nick gains the host role.
Okay.
He can promote Angie.
Okay.
My computer froze.
Okay. Yeah. That happened to me yesterday in rehearsal, so I'm that. So Angie will be ready for you in just a sec.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, and I know that you both and Pam Ironside, part of the study from the National League for Nursing. How long did it take you to do that?
They're probably close to 2 years because there was a lot of pre-work, both theoretical, intellectual, and then just the technical aspect of getting that survey together and how we would promote for a web-based survey. So it was something very different than I'm used to doing. As you know, Diane, I started out really in clinical research, working with children who knew onset seizures. And so I did a lot of face-to-face clinical types of data collection. So this was different for me. So it was very technically ground in a lot of ways, and we certainly learned a lot from that, what we would do differently in the future. So altogether, I would say about 2 years. It was probably a year getting it all ready and put together, and then data collection for several months, and then we've I guess technically finished analyzing and disseminating as far as what the NLN wanted from us, but we probably have 10 years worth of data to finish and work on, which we are doing as quickly as we can. So I would say all told about 2 years.
Okay, great. And we have here that are doing research and master students who may be doing some STEP projects. So maybe they're heartened to find out that in the real world, research doesn't take us as much time as it does to do the dissertation.
Very true.
Okay.
We're ready when you are.
Okay, good deal.
Angie to presenter. There you go.
Okay.
Yes, you are the presenter.
I might
advance the slides.
Well, it's not letting me advance the slides. There they go.
There you go.
Great. Well, Diane and the rest of all of the participants, thank you so much. I'm very excited about doing this. And I love to talk, and I love to share what I'm doing. As I said, I started out as a clinical researcher and really never anticipated doing this. And for those of you who are working on doctorates or thinking about doctorates, one of the things that you're expected to do is do research, but we don't always talk a lot about teaching. And when I was hired and started as faculty and spent that first hour in the classroom, I was hooked, and I loved it, and I loved being with the students, and I would say ignited a fire me to start thinking about best practices in teaching and learning. I started out very much looking at what was happening in the classroom, didactic, just because those were the courses that I was teaching. And as I've matured, kind of gotten more involved in the undergraduate program at IU School of Nursing, I've really come to find this niche where we need to establish evidence-based practices for teaching and learning, both in didactic and clinical, and perhaps clinical even more importantly, because that's not really something you can borrow from another discipline. You know, there's a lot out there on didactic teaching in the classroom from, you know, educational psychology and all sorts of things, but there's not a lot on clinical education. So that's kind of how I back into this, I guess. What I'm going to share with you, as I said before, is things. First, I'm talk about what we found in this educational survey, and I'm only going to present a little bit of the information. The study was enormous, and I would honestly tell you it raised more questions than provided answers. And so I'm actually going to kind of do the same thing to you. As I'm going to share a little bit of the results, but I think what it'll do is it'll raise many more inquiries for you than give you some answers to what you may be thinking. Just kind of a promo, the entire monograph will be published by CLN late this fall, and it will have a lot of detail and a lot of information. So I would very much encourage you to be able to get a hold of a copy of that and read it in total. So what I'll do is just present a little bit of data and then open it up for questions and answers. And also, as I'm talking, if there's a burning question that you need us for clarification, don't hesitate. I will try to be cognizant of the little hands going up as I go through. Suddenly, it won't let me.
This is Paula. I suddenly got a flash that said you are the presenter.
Okay, I think now I got it back. So
okay.
whatever was going on, I'm okay now. All right. So one of the main questions that we started out asking people was, essentially, how do you spend your time? And these were the top three. Supervising student skill performance was something that 1,636 team members said they do, and that accounted for almost 70% of their time. Then assisting students to synthesize clinical information assessment was indicated by over 1,000 people, and again, it was almost 50%. And finally, questioning students to assess clinical grasp of information and of their assigned patient's clinical status was something that 174 of our school team members said was their most time-consuming activity. And just to follow with that, the few other things that actually hit fairly high percentages was providing feedback on written work, ensuring patient safety, and evaluation of student performance. After they selected their top three activities that typically took most of their time in the clinical setting, we asked faculty respondents to estimate the percentage of time those activities took each day. So for those who said supervising student skill performance was their most time-consuming activity, as you can see, 51% indicated that it took between 50 and 100% of their time. Told us that synthesizing clinical information and assessment was time-consuming. 30% said that took between 50 and 100% of their time. And for those who said questioning students to assess their grasp of their assigned patient's clinical status, 10% indicated it took between 50 and 100% of their time. Now, I'm not the best mathematician, but I'm telling you, I think that means that people don't have time for anything else, and they are spending an enormous amount of time just in those activities. So the next thing that we did was we really wanted to see what was happening with pre- and post-clinical conference time, if people were still using that, and if they were, how they were using it. So kind of not surprisingly, a majority stated that they met with students as a group prior to the beginning of the clinical experience and predominantly used this time for reviewing students' organization and priorities for the experience, determining students' level of preparation to provide care, and reviewing the status of patients to whom the student was to provide care that day. We only had 781 of our respondents said they meet with students individually prior to the clinical day. Interestingly, as I mentioned before when we started the session about what everybody has going on and what to celebrate, we are currently examining our qualitative comments from the larger study to look for more detailed information on pre- and post activities. More when we're doing this observation study and trying to get a sense of what is actually happening on the clinical site, we probably will end up sampling a little bit of the pre- and post-conferences as well, just to, again, get a handle on exactly what type of teaching and learning is going on during that time. And come back after Paula talks, when we start talking about the PEP clinical model, what I want you to also keep in mind is think about how pre- and post-clinical conference will look in that model, and it's because it's different, because it's really not group work, it's individual work, how that's going to play out if and we start doing some different clinical education models. Look for, at the end of the day, it had a somewhat different pattern. Almost 90% of our respondents said they set aside time to meet with students as a group at the conclusion of the clinical experience, and use that time to discuss the kind of nursing practices they observed, including decisions nurses made, how nurses interacted with other healthcare professionals, and the tasks the nurses completed. Time also used to have students lead discussion of the patients for whom they provided care that day, and for reflective activities in which students considered their experience in relation to their previous experience and that of their peers. Half of the respondents set aside individual student post-clinical time and used the time for activities similar to the group activities just described, as well as they also mentioned that they reviewed the skills and procedures the students completed during the clinical day. From this, as you imagine, we really had more questions and lots of ideas for next research studies and next steps. But a few recommendations that we were able to make or made were that we really feel that new clinical models need to be developed and tested across sites, locations, and types of programs, as well as level of students. And I didn't mention this at the beginning, but that survey that we sent out went across, it was for all pre-licensure faculty and teaching in all sorts of programs. So we really need information that will cut across programs and levels of students as we move forward. We also feel like a lot of what was shared often said, well, I tried this, but I'm not sure if it worked, or I tried this and I felt like it didn't work, so I abandoned it. And I guess one of my things, again, being a pretty left-sided, left-brained person, is I wish we would test all of these and not abandon things that don't work and not retain things that potentially don't work. So making our practices much more evidence-based in our teaching and learning area of work. I think we also need to really identify critical aspects of learning in clinical settings, and it goes a little bit to what Paula is going to talk about in terms of what best taught in the clinical setting, what can best be taught in simulation or other non-clinical venues. And the last thing is that we really need to have outcomes that can be broadly determined. That's as fast as I can talk and try to give you as much information as possible. Are there any questions or comments?
Diane, feel free to raise your hand. We'll probably unmute one line at a time and call on you. And I ask the speakers to speak quickly, we could have more time for questions and comments. So, what's on right now? Feel free to raise your hand.
Do you need to call her? Or do I have the power?
You must have the power. I don't see anybody. So, just
okay. Do I just click on the hand?
Yeah, Elizabeth Arnold is had a question and her line is unmuted.
Okay. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great.
Elizabeth, I'm having trouble hearing you. If you could speak more slowly and start again.
I was more me.
Yes.
Yep.
I had more of a comment that I thought it was interesting. 9% of the responses for the post-clinical survey was maybe observing the practice of the nurse. I was wondering, is that, where like the clinical direction is going, where it seems like in experience I've been shadowed a lot by students. Are they observing my individual practice or?
I do, and that's part of why we are trying to sift into the open-ended and qualitative comments. For each of these areas, we always left a comment box, and so what we're trying to do is discern what exactly they were talking about. My sense is that they were asking what did they see other nurses do, what practices did they do themselves, how they made decisions, but it wasn't really clear from their response how differentiated that.
Okay.
But hopefully it's not all observation. I mean,
Right.
I know that tactile learning is so important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
We had an option from Marianne.
Am I muted?
Oh, you're open.
No, I can hear you.
Okay. It was just a comment, and thank you for the information you've given us so far, Dr. McNellis. I just wanted to say that AACN had a conference in New Mexico last week, and it really was targeted at new faculty, pre-tenured faculty. Unfortunately, the snow prevented all of our scholars who were supposed to go, and through no fault of their own, act of God, they could not attend, but the three faculty were there. and so we went to different sessions just so we could bring back as much as possible to share with the scholars. And this is Seton Hall. And I went to one on clinical teaching, and I really was listening, and of course these were young clinical faculty, and most of them didn't even teach didactic, it was just clinical. And I was absolutely amazed that I've been teaching since 1978, and only 4 years ago was my last time I did clinical. So their problems and the ways that they found solutions, I liked every single one of them. And now that I'm listening to the information from Dr. McNellis, I'm thinking, I originally felt good because I thought, well, then I guess that makes what I would have to offer about clinical teaching valid. But now I'm listening to all the information from, parts of the information that you just gave us so far, and I'm thinking, I don't know if that's so good that we're still reinventing the wheel, and it didn't seem as though they had support systems to help them generate the solutions to the problems that have been around since the age when I started teaching. So it's really just a comment and reinforcing your sense that we need research for evidence-based clinical practice too. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that comment. And I will tell you, reading some of the open-ended comments, it was almost heartbreaking. People working very hard to do workarounds and create better experiences. I mean, I was amazed at the level of dedication and commitment that my colleagues across the country have for improving education. But part of that is doing it within a system that essentially hasn't changed for, I mean, I've been out 25 years, and it's the model's still the same that I learned in, but patients are very different, and the complexity is very different. And so I echo your concerns. I think if you and I could step back into those positions, because in some ways the whole model itself hasn't changed in response to learner needs and patient needs and a different environment.
Okay, Dan, thank you both. Some interesting comments and some a little challenge for our scholars who are coming on and help us develop solutions. And looks like we have the poll right now, the results of the poll, and this is kind of interesting. It looks like everybody's doing everything. Does everybody see the poll? If not, now the numbers, maybe that's a little different way. I think half of you are doing most of these. At least half of you are doing most of clinical teaching activities. And I guess I would say for the people who have never done clinical teaching, here's a little preview of the kinds of things that happen. And certainly from Angie's study, you'll see where faculty are spending their time and where this might give you a little heads up as where to develop your teaching skills because of the activities you'll be faced with. Well, let me now ask any more questions for Angie, and if not, we'll move ahead. Are we? I can't see the question, the hand raised.
There are no hands raised.
Okay. Well, I'm going to move ahead here, and we're shifting gears. We're going to talk a little bit about using simulations in clinical education. And we have another polling question now that we've had some experience with these. And if this doesn't come up, I'm okay. We can kind of punt with it. But I would like to know what's going on in New Jersey. I would like you to know what's going on in New Jersey about the use of simulations in curricula. As I know the faculty know, and the students may, the State Board of Nursing have a lot to say about the clinical hours and how the clinical hours should be spent and in which topics and so on. So I'm wondering what's going on in New Jersey, and in some ways here that we will come with one answer, but let's see what you all have a sense of. In New Jersey, do you know the position of your state board? Does it say that you can use simulations as clinical? And if you have that understanding, you can click on A. Can you use, say, approximately 10% of your clinical allocated hours used in simulations, or is it closer to, say, 30? And I don't know if you're Paul, I don't know what the top range is, but probably that may be getting close to the top. And then there's another possibility that there's no guidelines available. So I'll say go and vote, and if we can see the results, and Farrell, I think I'm okay for you to show them now.
I've got 5 seconds left, so
okay,
see.
We'll wait. Okay, it's on the timer. Okay. And, Farrell, can you see results? You can show here.
Yes, 2%
As they roll in.
are A, 16% B, 7% C, 25% D, 50% hasn't answered.
Okay. Well, this is a question that probably just has one answer, and by seeing this diversity of responses, this is a little indication of something. I'm not sure which, but I will ask one of the faculty who they have an answer here to this question to raise your hand and call on you. And I can't see some of the hands so much. So can one faculty tell us in here? Yeah.
We have a hand up from Maria and from Janet Mahoney. So, Janet, you're, I'm sorry, Janet's not staying. One moment, please.
Okay. And Andy, I saw your hand. We'll call on you after we hear from somebody in New Jersey.
That was me.
Okay, I'm muting the lines without names on them. Janet, are you one of those callers?
Yes, I'm from New Jersey.
Okay, Janet. What's the story?
No guidelines in New Jersey.
People doing whatever feel like.
Brand new to us. We're still trying to find our way with the simulation and what hours will count. There aren't guidelines yet.
So now each school is doing their own thing?
Yes.
Okay. Well, here's a project for some student related to education policy, because this is definitely an education policy issue at the national level and at various state levels, and various states have taken this on and made legislation about it. So some student that doesn't have anything needs a project, we'll put it that way. There is something to see the legislation required and all the issues around it. Anne, did you want to say something?
I was just going to kind of challenge people to think about the whole idea of we're talking about substituting simulation for clinical hours, and we really don't even understand what is that explicit learning and how much learning goes on in the clinical setting. It's hard to say how should simulation. I mean, some of our debates have been that, wow, simulation is so focused and condensed, should it count for twice as much as a typical clinical experience? And I'll also throw this out from that education say is faculty talk about how much downtime students have. They were always trying to find other things for them to do, sending them off for observation, sending them to go work with nurses, because one, they didn't have enough time, as you saw. They didn't have enough time to take care of their group of 10 in their clinical group, so they were farming them out to do other things so that they would have experiences. But it kind of all goes back to this idea of it's hard to compare apples and oranges when we really don't even know what's going on in clinical education. So I would also encourage people to think about that's really what we need to start documenting. We consider it a gold standard. Yeah, I'm not sure that we've been able to provide evidence that, in fact, that traditional clinical model of 10 students is a gold standard.
Most of those ideas. And Janet, again, thanks for the definitive answer there. I'm going to move us ahead now and turn the presenter podium over to Paula, and she is going to give us some principles that we can use in making these decisions. And I would say now, given my understanding of what's going on in New Jersey, that these may be helpful to these, the individual schools and to some of the discussions at statewide levels. So, Paula, do you have the presenter podium now?
I think so, although I just clicked and nothing. Oh, there you go. We're
okay. Well, take it away.
Okay. Thank you. I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to do this, and I'm finding the process quite enjoyable. So thank you for inviting me to spend my Friday morning with you. I guess it's Friday afternoon for you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about simulation and what's emerged in Oregon as far as some frameworks and some focus on how we're designing and developing our simulation experiences. New Jersey, we do not have any regulation in our Nurse Practice Act regarding how much or how little simulation we can use in our programs. We are fortunate. We had some pretty phenomenal leadership in the early days when simulation first kind of emerged as a possibility for clinical education. And every school of nursing in our state, except for one, has either a high-fidelity simulation lab or is involved in a partnership where they have access to one. So we have over 30 simulate in the state, and which is pretty remarkable because our state's actually small from a population perspective. There's only about 3 million people in our state. So simulation has been incorporated extensively in every curriculum. Now, we don't know how effective it is yet, but we're working on figuring it out. So it's just kind of an overview of where we are in Oregon. Probably, as far as when we compare with other states, we're maybe a little further along than many states because we started the whole process in the early part of the decade. So I want to talk about, begin with just thinking a little bit about how do you figure out what to simulate. So obviously we started the conversation with thinking about regulation. You do have to think about your Nurse Practice Act. California has a limit of 25%. The National Council State Board of Nursing is really studying simulation right now and looking at making some recommendations regarding what states might want to consider for their Nurse Practice Acts, and they're using, I think it's West Virginia's model as a possible exemplar. So if you get a chance, go to West Virginia Nurse Practice Act and look at what they created. I don't think they put it into their administrative rules, but they created a policy paper, and the National Council is looking at that policy paper as a possible model. You want to think about your accreditation standards, your university and program-specific policies that you need to comply with. Then I think the next thing to do is really think about the purposes. Why are you going to simulate? What's the reason for doing this? And I'm really appreciative of what Angie brought forward in that we tend to say, well, it's just not the same as the gold standard of the way we've always taught clinical education. Well, there's probably pretty good merit with taught clinical education, but we can't really call it the gold standard because we haven't studied it. So it's very difficult to use comparative argument when we don't have evidence regarding what the gold standard really is. You might want to think about what competencies you want to use simulation to help your students develop. And then approach used in Oregon is we begin the simulation experiences early in the curriculum to look at high prevalent problems. So we know that our students are going to be exposed over and over to patients with diabetes and to patients with heart disease and patients with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So early simulations actually focus on the highly prevalent health conditions so that when students actually encounter those patients in some unstable environments that they've had some practice in simulation. Another thing we've looked at, and this is again related to the prevalence issue, is what we know about learning theory is that, especially intuitive reasoning, really is related to pattern recognition. So we have developed simulations so that students get repeated exposure to the same kinds of health problems over and over again with, the stories are different, so they're different patients, but they get multiple exposures to diabetic patients. They get multiple exposures to patients that are hospitalized or experiencing congestive heart failure, and we're very intentional about helping them identify the patterns and the normal the trajectory of certain kinds of prevalent illnesses, and we do that through simulation. And then another purpose that you might want to consider is the kinds of experience that don't happen very often, but the stakes are high. So an example of that might be a hemorrhage after surgery. So for our students, our patients really don't hemorrhage after surgery, but if they do, you certainly want the nurse to know what to be able to do about that. So that would be an example of a low volume but high stake kind of experience that you could simulate. Okay, I'm trying to advance the slide.
Here, okay.
Okay. So what should guide, I guess, is continue with the conversation, you really want to think about your simulation program in terms of a curriculum and how it complements your curriculum, not as isolated episodic learning experiences. So we have, we've really spent a lot of time looking carefully at how to create simulation experiences from a curriculum perspective. So obviously, when you do that, you're going to design your simulation experiences to complement your program and your course outcomes. We've used some research to determine what we're going to simulate. National Council of State Board of Nursing Studies. An example of this would be I think it was 2004 study identified that over 80% of students never had an opportunity to talk with a physician over the phone in their pre-licensure program. So we have created lots of opportunity for students to do that in the simulation lab. You can look at your own graduate and employer surveys and determine where the gaps are between what your program outcomes, your graduate outcomes are, and what the graduate themselves and employees are actually saying they're able to do. An example of this is the last program that I taught in. Overwhelmingly, both the graduates and the employers said that our grads really weren't very with how to delegate to unlicensed staff. So we created some simulations to provide that opportunity for them. And then you can use national studies and national surveys like the one to think about how simulation is going to fit into your curriculum. You also might want to design simulation experiences to complement other kinds of clinical learning experiences. I have with faculty in Oregon that have used cases that have actually happened in Oregon then to develop scenarios. So something will happen in a clinical on a clinical day or in a clinical unit that was really a paradigm case, and they create a simulation scenario then to allow the students to go back and reinvent the experience. They have an opportunity to do a do-over and to really enhance that learning. And of course, you're also going to look at about access to clinical environments. We have a huge problem with access to clinical environments in Oregon. We have almost enrollment since 2003, so our hospital sites are pretty saturated. And because we're a rural state, our students in the rural communities never have access to a children's hospital, or they may not have access to hospitalized children in the course of their clinical experience if they happen to have an acute care experience during the winter when we're going to see hospitalized in critical access hospitals. They never have an opportunity to take care of a child in the hospital, and so those are some of the experiences that we are simulating in order to put that for them. Okay, now I'm going to kind of switch over and talk about a framework that we've used to create and design our simulation labs and our simulation experience. So we feel strongly that in order for simulation to work, it's pretty much it's really a group activity, and so you want to facilitate a community of learners. And there's some basic things that you want to do in order to facilitate that community of learners. Is first of all, you want to establish and communicate expectations regarding participation. So we typically, we have some guidance about this is what it means to be a participant in simulation, and sometimes we talk about respect. We acknowledge that we have a variety of learning styles and that some people may be actively participating but maybe as verbal in the briefings and debriefings because their learning style is such that they reflect first and then are more comfortable speaking later. So try to make a place for diverse learning styles, but also make it clear that we expect participation. We try to incorporate the principles of dialogue, which means we ask people to identify assumptions and suspend them to learn. They can all those assumptions back again and incorporate them in the activity and the learning that happens. but we ask for respect and listening, as well as active identification of assumptions that affect learning and perceptions. So the next bullet I think is interesting. We really try to create a no-blame environment. We are in the process of having a pretty active discussion among many simulation labs in the state about whether simulation should be used for some evaluation. And we haven't come to a conclusion because we've kind of jointly determined that our sim labs are no blame, which means we use formative assessment, but it's a place where it's okay to make a mistake. And that's what we do, is we learn from mistakes in simulation. We don't have to worry about harming patients. So now I put some parentheses around no blame, because what we have learned is we have to make it clear to students that the simulation environment is a no blame environment, but there are consequences. So if you conduct yourself unprofessionally in you can be held accountable for that. And we've had that happen a couple times. We've had students that really have been unprofessional, and we need to be clear that that goes back to the first one. There's expectations about what it means to be a participant, and so there can be consequences to what happens in simulation. And finally, encouraging the learners to support and learn from each other. So really creating that collaborative learning environment. So then part of our framework is that we create our simulation experiences so they're knowledge-centered. So we want to design our scenarios to provide learners the opportunity to apply recently learned knowledge from class. So typically our scenarios complement whatever's going on in class. If they're in the EAC unit, then the simulations that they're going to participate during that part of the quarter system are going to be focused on clients with cardiac disease or health promotion activities regarding want to provide scenarios that really require the learners to retrieve previously learned knowledge. We know that from nursing education. One of the problems we have is we teach things in class, but whether or not students are going to have the opportunity to apply what they've learned in class in a time frame that's complementary in clinical is often a little dicey. So we sometimes design scenarios that make sure that students have to come back and think about what we learned last quarter and apply it now, especially at the end of program. For instance, we have typically most of the OB content is taught fairly early in the curriculum, and then at the end of the program, students are getting ready to take NCLEX or maybe getting ready for their final clinical experience, and spending a half or a while since they've had any OB exposure. So we'll opportunity for them to retrieve that knowledge through up in a simulation experience. And then we want to design scenarios and debriefings that facilitate the ability for students to take what they've learned in the past and synthesize it with new knowledge that they're currently learning. So I think that's one of the attributes of simulation is being able to provide opportunity for students to synthesize previously learned knowledge with new knowledge. The next piece of the framework is that it's learner-centered. So we take some time to really get to know our learners, and they do a great job, I think, of. She apparently does this every time, of getting us, you all have a sense of who you are and what what's important and what you're learning and what your challenges are. And certainly we try to emulate the same thing in the sim lab. We try to embrace the role of teacher as an expert learner, and so we acknowledge that the simulation is a learning experience for students or for teachers too. We like to acknowledge that simulation takes an enormous amount of planning, but you also have to be prepared. So there's some time that needs to be spent to prepare for simulation because you don't know what's going to happen. If I'm doing a simulation on an area that I don't have much knowledge or haven't practiced in for a while, then I'm going to have to prepare for what might happen because I don't know what the students are going to do. We make it clear to the learners that simulation is a combination of experiential and reflective learning is a huge piece of the simulation experience. And again, learners are active participants in all aspects of the experience, both the experiential piece and the reflective piece, and the faculty really are there to provide expert guidance. So, and then finally, we try to focus simulation as assessment centered. We promote the idea that learners should be self-assessing their own knowledge and performance. We try to provide adequate time in the experience for lots of formative assessment. We use the pre-simulation time to allow students to be intentional about their prior knowledge with what they're likely to encounter. So we have slides and all kinds of preparatory materials to help them do that. We have learned that we need to accommodate ongoing dialogue even after the simulation experience, especially for those learners that are more introspective and are not going to be, they'll take the simulation experience and kind of mull it over, and maybe in a day or two they'll be more willing to, more ready to share their reflective and thinking. So we've learned to provide mechanisms for that to happen. We have to provide feedback in a variety of formats. The debriefing experience is one mechanism to do that, and some other ideas are reflective journals, blogs, where we've tried that, email, chain letters. And we've also taken some of the classroom assessment techniques from Angelo and Cross and modified them to be used in simulation. So now I'm going to switch just a little bit and talk about what simulations to really promote the development of clinical judgment. And because Chris Tanner is very front and center in all of the work that we're doing in Oregon regarding nursing education transformation as well as clinical education transformation, we're using her clinical judgment model. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but if you're not, then you can go back and look at it, and but really are very intentional about designing our simulation experiences to promote the development of that model. So that means that we look closely, and this is a little reiterative, but we look closely at what the students bring to the situation. So it means the pre-simulation experiences are very, very important so that students have an opportunity to retrieve, articulate, identify their knowledge and past experiences and the assumptions that are going to be relevant to what they think might happen in the scenario that they're about ready to confront. And we're very intentional about acknowledging that nurses use all kinds of different knowledge when they make clinical judgments. We encourage the students to talk about what kinds of experiences have you had with past students that you think might be relevant to what we know about this case that we're about ready to encounter. And maybe even what are your personal experiences that are influencing what you think is going to happen here. We know from Dr. Tanner's clinical judgment model is what the nurse brings to the situation is paramount into related to the clinical judgment that he or she makes. And so we're very intentional about trying to identify what the nurse or the students are bringing to the simulation. And that's another issue I want to just is that when we're doing simulation, we are very clear that the student is functioning as a nurse, not as a student, which because we're really trying to help them learn to think like a nurse. So we put them in the role. It's safe to do that. So that's another important kind of mindset that we're using. So if you're familiar with Dr. Tanner's model, she talks about different kinds of interpretation that nurses use when they make clinical judgments. When they reason, and so there's three different kinds of reasoning patterns that she said nurses use when they make clinical judgments, and those three reasoning patterns are narrative reasoning, analytical reasoning, and intuitive reasoning. So when we design our scenarios, we're very intentional and deliberate about incorporating those kinds of reasonings into the storyboard. And what that means as far as the narrative reasoning is we give the opportunity for the students to know the patient. Because we know that when just make clinical judgments, what is important to the patient makes a difference difference to the nurse. Here she's making a judgment, so we incorporate that into the storyline that we create for the students in the scenario. We lots of opportunity for analytical reasoning, especially in debriefing. So that's the science. What do you think these symptoms were about, or what are the symptoms of low potassium? And so the science, and then we also are very intentional about the intuitive reasoning that might have occurred during the scenario, and that's really the pattern recognition, and we try to uncover that during the debriefing dialogue. So, we also know that this, back to the narrative reasoning, is that sound clinical judgments are influenced by knowing the patient. And what we've learned is we can recreate that in simulation by using unfolding scenarios. So it means that we might have a simulation session over 3 or 4 hours, and rather than doing 3 or 4 cases that involve different patients, we'll use the same patient for all 3 scenarios and unfold it over time. So we have one that I think is absolutely exquisite. It's been published a couple times. You could retrieve it. It's an end-of-life scenario about a woman who has lung cancer. And the first scenario involves this person being diagnosed with lung cancer, and the second scenario involves her taking care of her when she's getting chemo and dealing with a fluid balance problem. And the scenario is the actual end-of-life scenario where it dies. And there, we create the scenarios so there's some ambiguous information. They have to make judgments in each of the kind of chapters of this unfolding case. We also give them opportunity to know the patient. Her name is Alice, and her family, and her desires. And so the listener, they have to make some ethical decisions that are really based on knowing this individual patient. So that's been a really powerful use of simulation. Finally, we know that clinical judgment is often triggered by a breakdown in practice. So when we think back about the kind of the personal paradigm cases, sometimes it's really a case that didn't do well. So we've designed some scenarios that we call are just manageable difficulties. So if you're familiar with Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, you do the scenarios so there's enough ambiguity and uncertainty that they're difficult. But what we do with that is we are ready to provide scaffolds and coaching if the students are flailing. We pretty much have a rule that unless the scenario is about end of life, we don't let the mannequins die. We rescue the students if their actions would have been really detrimental to the patient. And we call those scaffolds in coaching. But we do know that it's important to have some scenarios that really kind of push them to the edge of their competency in their practice. So just one of my favorite quotes regarding simulation, I think it's very applicable, is that we're in a time of drastic change as far as healthcare, and we have to be really take the risk of doing things differently, because all that we once had really no longer exists. Comments?
Paula, while people are getting their questions organized here, and again, I can't see if people are raising their hands, so either Nick or, now I'm the presenter, so I guess I can. So if anybody has questions that they would like to ask Paula, and Paula, again, thank you. And for people who are in the faculty who are thinking about or in the process of developing clinical scenarios, you have given a wealth of information and marvelous food for thought, and love the theoretical pieces of your work and Chris's work too. It's grounded, so thank you for presenting that. Okay, well, we have a comment. I'm going to call on Christy Stinson first. So, go ahead with your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. I really appreciated everything you said, because I'm a admitted novice when it comes to simulation. And I really appreciated what you said, that for faculty as well, it is a big learning curve, and they too are learners in the whole simulation process. And to address that, it seems that at most schools, there's a handful of faculty who are even remotely comfortable in the simulation lab setting. And is there any suggestions that you can maybe give that we could possibly change that so we can have more faculty comfortable with its use, and therefore we can use more widespread with our students?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is a huge learning curve to learning how to use simulation. Both it's a different kind of teaching approach, and the technology is pretty interesting and overwhelming at times. So what we've done in Oregon is we have first of all, we have the consortium, which I'm going to talk about in my next session. So that's created a network of users, but we also were able to get some pretty hefty grants through another organization that we created called the Oregon Simulation Alliance. That's a multidisciplinary organization, but through that we created a 2-week workshop that we were able to provide for free all over the state. And so I think we've educated about 350 educators through that 2-day workshop. So really used to train the trainer approach, which has been pretty effective.
And I'm going to ask Angie to talk about, I think you are part of IU, but the faculty here in Indianapolis, there's a grant for faculty development for all of the schools of nursing here in this area.
Right there, it was actually a consortium of 4 schools. It was the School of Nursing, and then 3 schools within Indianapolis. Some were research-intensive universities. We had 2 private universities, and then we actually had Ivy Tech. So it was a 2-year ASN program. And what we did a week-long institute where we started with kind of a theoretical foundation and ended with actually development of numerous scenarios. We had faculty group across schools, so they were taking scenarios back so that in most of the institutes that we've done so far, we've done 3 of them, each school would emerge with somewhere between 3 and 4 scenarios to take back, and they did have the technical aspect. We have a nice relationship with Laurel, so they came and provided the technical hands-on training for using the high-fidelity mannequins. And then we actually, with each group of scholars, meet monthly as we're developing the scenarios, testing them. I actually am the evaluator for all of them, so I coordinate the multi-site study aspect for them, and we're testing it for fidelity and realism, all those components, as well as trying to look at student learning outcomes.
Okay,
really.
I'm going to just summarize and then call on the next person. I think what I hear from these 2 examples, the key is some kind of a consortium approach. It's really difficult to do onesies and twosies, and you can get a much bigger bang for your buck if you can get a consortium in your community or even state. And I know those are some of the areas that the New Jersey Nursing Initiative is looking at, so I'll do that seed. But let me move on so we can get 2 other questions in, and then we'll keep being mindful of our time and move ahead. I hate this rule I have here. Mura, go ahead.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, hi. Firstly, it was a very interesting talk. I am very interested in simulations, so it was a conversation that resonate well with me. The question that I have really, and almost a concern, we have adjunct faculty that teach clinicals. And I myself have been adjunct faculty that has taught clinicals, and it's very interesting because continuing what Christy was saying about not a lot of faculty being familiar with using simulation, and then you come on as an adjunct faculty, not very familiar with the institution, and it's kind of thrown into play as, well, one of those clinical days you can use a simulation. But there's not a lot of resource sometimes within institutions that allow you to fully use the simulation experience. So what ends up happening is we do end up using it in that, I think you said, episodic and isolated instances. That's what simulation becomes, and it is clear that it really should be part of the curriculum. It seems like we should be changing the structure of that system around it so that those who do teach clinical a lot also have the opportunity to use the technology to its full benefit.
Well, I agree. I mean, I had the opportunity to co-author an editorial a couple of years ago for Jenny, and we titled it Clinical Education from Random Access Opportunity to a Curriculum. And what you're talking about is that exactly that kind of, we teach according to what the random access is to a particular experience. The beauty of simulation is we don't have to do that. We can plan it, and we can create and integrate it as an activity embedded in a curriculum, not as what happens to be available. So that's just creating a vision, I think, not just, that's a huge, but bring people together, creating your collaborative or your consortium, and then creating a vision for the possibilities.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Thanks for Mira for the question. I'm going to call Connie, and then I'm going to call on Bob, and then we'll get back to Angie, and she'll be our next section presenter. So go ahead.
Hi. I have a couple of questions. One is, and listening to how you structure these, and I completely agree with what we touched on, is that it really needs to be part of a regular curriculum, that strategies also would work at a master's level. And is any work being done at the master's level to include simulation for practitioner students that you're aware of?
We're actually doing some work in Oregon at Oregon Health Science University. So we're in the middle of an exciting project that we're using it with our nurse midwifery students. We're actually combining the undergrads with the nurse midwifery students, so they're doing a little bit of research through a HRSA grant with that, so you will have access to that information. We're using it in our nurse anesthesia program, and we're beginning to plan to use it in our family nurse practitioner program.
Because some of the issues are very, very similar, where at the master's level, we're seeing the ability to get regular clinical placements, to be able to match classroom content with current clinical experiences doesn't always happen, but if you can use simulation to boot that's a wonderful opportunity. And my next question is, in all the work that you're doing, are we looking and being mindful about whether this is a more cost-effective way to educate our nurses, or whether this is more expensive, or whether because it's more expensive and it's better, that the cost-benefit analysis leads us to continue to pursue this? We're looking in New Jersey at some pretty significant budget increase, and I think we're going to be asked as educators to continue mindful of what we do as related to cost. So I'm wondering if that's been.
We know in Oregon is that simulation is expensive the way we've set up. So that's one of the questions that are, if we get the RWJ EIN grant, we'll be bringing that question in some more detail. What we have to do, I think, is show the value added of simulation, because the technology and the human power that it takes to run the technology and really create a well-designed learning experience, it's expensive in terms of human resources.
I think it's going to be really important to get data that shows that the cost is worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to keep us moving ahead. Good questions, Connie. Bob, let's call on Bob Scolavino.
Hi, I just wanted to say that I enjoyed the presentation. I was a faculty at Rutgers University at simulation, and now I'm the simulation coordinator on a part-time basis, and I just wanted to comment on what I had said about the adjunct faculty. One of the challenges that we have had is getting faculty in or out to become comfortable with the simulators. And my question is, as far as a facilitator or a technical person to run the simulators, how do you see future going as far as what do you think? You see like a full-time faculty that is in charge of all simulation that could be the expert person, or do you see the clinical instructors always having a role in this?
Well, that's another thing that the program will study, because we have both kinds of models and a lot in between here in Oregon. So our intent is to look at the learning outcomes related to different styles that you're talking about. Both can work, and I think it depends on, again, it's training and it's being intentional and having a vision for your curriculum. What we do see happening, I really think that having a tech that doesn't have to be a nurse. You don't have to pay a nursing faculty to do this, but having a tech to really be an expert in the technical aspects, I see as a trend that I think is going to be probably important for creating simulation experiences.
Yeah, because we're in the process, and the other thing, to the Seton Hall, our Seton Hall colleagues, I love the idea of the consortium like you guys have in Oregon. This is the first I've heard of it. At Rutgers, we have integrated it into just about all of our clinical courses and have started to integrate it into the graduate program, specifically the acute care nurse practitioner. But this is the first time we've ever had, being myself, enough to have the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation grant. It made me step back from a faculty into the role of the tech coordinator person. I actually have the good graces of being able to learn the technical aspects of it. I've been taking these machines apart. Plus, I have my faculty and nursing experience to kind of help me through it, so that I'm seen as sort of like the person that guides them all through it, and it becomes very difficult to get the faculty to take ownership of it and develop scenarios and want to bring the students in more than what they're supposed to. Mm-hmm. Right now, we minimally do one clinical day in all of our courses.
Okay. Bob, can I put you in touch with Paula? I think
Sure.
she leaves her email at the end here, and you guys can continue this. We're at the half hour.
Great. I'm sorry to take too much.
I want you to use this time, and I hate to be the one to call it off, but I know we have two more important topics, and I want to have time for those. And there's, we have more dialogue, so we'll be sure that we get more. So I'm going to move us ahead, and now we're going to. Thanks, Bob. I'm going to ask Eddie to be the next here and talk about some innovative models, and Angie and Paul both. Let's for 10 with the sentence and 5 minutes for question and answer if we can. I hate to do this. We always have so much great stuff. I want these questions and comments. So, but let's see what we can do. Have the controls?
Yes, I do. All right.
Okay.
Well, I can talk fast, as Diane well knows. I think this actually is a nice segue from what Paula shared. When we were looking at developing something different, what we really wanted to do is create an environment where students could learn and begin to think like a nurse, to borrow a phrase. And we also had concerns about the lack of quality clinical sites as well as quality faculty. I mean, I think everybody, including us, are facing shortages in that area. So as we started to think about doing things differently, we all thought, and I would ask you to think as well about, how are you educated in your undergrad program? And essentially all of us came up with the idea, well, exactly the same. Things haven't changed in 25, 30, 45, 50 years. We're still essentially using the same model, and we're starting to be concerned that it doesn't work. So we went to the literature, and thankfully there were some pioneers out of Flinders, Australia, as well as our in Portland, who had already started looking at something called the Dedicated Education Unit. And it's a model that essentially creates a partnership between a school of nursing and a healthcare facility. And a unit in that facility became dedicated to that school of nursing, and only those students from that university went and had their clinical experiences on that unit. Well, that was a wonderful model and worked well for both of the schools. However, in Indianapolis, we have so much competition for each quality clinical site, any clinical site, that we really couldn't make that component of it. So we felt like we couldn't call it a DEU, or Dedicated Education Unit, so we came up with something called the PEP, Practice Education Partnership. And so it is modeled on that original EU idea. However, it's much more, we really tailored it. We tailored it to each individual facility's needs. Essentially, PEP units are hospital-based units that were created to create consistent environments for the students so that they are paired with the same nurse and they work on the same unit, potentially work with the same patients or at least similar types of patients for the duration of their clinical practicum experience in whatever course that is. Our PEP units really reflect that partnership and that tailoring so that we kind of got the best of all worlds. We took the strongest and best staff nurses and trained them as preceptors. We had the consistency of clinical faculty. We tried to start with faculty who had already spent a substantive amount of time on that unit in prior years so that there was a smooth transition. And again, the whole idea was that there's consistency for the students across that learning time, so they have that continuity that we feel will deepen learning experience and increase quality patient care. So to report on essentially is the evaluation component, how that worked. Well, I will tell you, starting out, like any initiative, we really weren't sure what we were doing, 100%. And I would say more specifically, it was such a substantial role change for our faculty members that it has been an evolution. And we went in very transparent with our partners, saying, we don't know it 100%. We don't know what it's going to look like. This is a partnership. We will try it. We'll change things as it goes, and it's been a win-win for everyone. A typical clinical day that one would encounter if this was adopted really varies according to, I would say, the faculty relationship with the unit, the faculty relationship with the preceptors, and the faculty relationship with the other staff on the unit who aren't directly involved in the PEP model. So it really does take a village, and it starts to encompass everybody on the unit. I mean, even the janitorial staff gets involved, and so it almost does involve everyone. However, it's really that close relationship that the faculty has with the key stakeholders. And I would also say it really varies according to faculty style. The biggest barrier I have seen is faculty letting go of their previous role. They really change what they do. So a typical clinical day never entails running around with your hair on fire like it usually does, and it's not predominantly focused around medications. So the faculty figure out the time on the unit that they need to be, and it's not always higher time. The students are on it. They try to spend time with the preceptor because it becomes a triangle, like a triad with the student in the middle and the faculty and preceptors on either endpoint. And the faculty is a resource for both the preceptor as well as the student. Everybody has their own distinct roles. So the preceptor is the expert clinician. The faculty become the expert educator, and so they help facilitate the student learning by facilitating the preceptor to become an educator. This always figure out how to do time with students, and then when I was talking earlier, I talked about what pre-post conference start to look like. It becomes less of a group activity and much more an individual, and it's not always pre and post. Oftentimes it's intra, but it is connecting with the students, spending time with them, talking with them, and helping them to develop their ideas and professional development. Typically, faculty also try to do some sorts of rounds, but whatever is already going on with the unit. They create their own rounds. It's a really difficult role for the faculty, and one of our more faculty talks about this discovery of figuring out how to hover and linger. And I think that's exactly, when I've observed her, that's exactly what she does. She figures out where she should get involved, where she shouldn't. She hangs around to look for times that need her intervention, but most of the time tries to stay out of the way of the learning that's occurring and the relationship that's developing between the preceptor and the students. And their faculty are always available by beeper. With type clinical models, and I apologize if you've already read a lot about them and know a lot about them, but they're fairly new, so indulge me. For our faculty, it is not always, you're not able to take 10 students on a unit because there's not going to be 10 preceptors. And so typically what happens, if your normal rotation would have been, I have students on a unit Monday and Tuesday, or even just Monday, you now may have students on the unit Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday so that they can spend time with their preceptor. And typically students are starting to work 12-hour shifts because they work the work that what their preceptor does. So it's been a great experience. Students at IU were clamoring for that. They felt shortchanged when they had to end their day at 1 or 2 and not be able to see their patient come back from a procedure, or not be able to help with discharge, or not being able to receive new patients on the unit. So they love seeing the 12-hour. They like seeing the flow, what it really takes. And hopefully we're preparing them better for the real world, because they're not going to have, their day isn't going to be done after 6 hours like a typical clinical day might be. Their day is actually going to be 12 or 13, and so they're getting acclimated to that. I suddenly lost power. Here, I advanced the slide. Could you do that for me, please?
I did. Is that it?
Now on 37, please.
Yep. I see it on my screen. Do you see it for yours?
No, I had not, but now I do. All right.
Okay.
So as I said, we evaluate this, and with generous funding from the National League for Nursing, we were able to start evaluating it from the very beginning. And so I did different evaluations for the different stakeholders. So I'm going to start with the faculty. The faculty, in terms of advantages, perceive that the PEP model decreases student downtime, where they have already spent waiting for the faculty member to supervise medications and treatments. And just an anecdote, one of our faculty talked about feeling like she essentially was a bottleneck, that students were always waiting in line for her to do medications, and that's essentially what she did all day. And so this whole idea of opening up the neck and being able to make the student on time, have them always engaged and involved, hopefully will, again, result in their learning outcomes. Faculty also felt that this will increase the patient context that students had, and increase student application of didactic content to patient care. And let me just make a comment on that. I did this little bit of a study just out of curiosity. I wanted to see how this PEP model was impacting didactic course grades. And we chose to start our PEP in Surge 1, which is 5th semester in our curriculum. And then after the first iteration, we expanded it to Med-Surg 2 as well. And what I looked at was students who had PEP both 5th and 6th semester, and students had no PEP at all, because we have many of our Rachel are not in PEP units. And there's a statistically significant difference on every single exam, including final and on final course exam grades, between the students who had PEP versus no PEP. And not only do I look for statistical differences, but I look for clinical significance. from a student standpoint, the clinical significance was that the difference wasn't just like a 0.2 or a 0.3. It was translated into a full course grade difference. So they PEP students were getting Bs, whereas the PEP students were getting As. So this idea that they're applying didactic content, I think, rings a true bell. As part of the faculty's role in this triad, that they are constantly informing, both verbally and physically, preceptors in terms of what is happening in the didactic classroom content. So they will tell preceptors, really focused on management of the diabetic patient this week. So if at all possible, take patients, your patient assignment that have diabetes, and talk to the student, ask them about plans of care, kind of force them to pull in that didactic information when they're determining point of care or patient care. So just an aside. Faculty also talked about that they really felt that able to contribute to the educational environment on the unit by bringing for evidence-based practice. They do posters, they do lunch journals, they try to give the preceptors information, current information that's coming out of the journals, things that the preceptor may not have time to do. So the faculty break that and share that with them. And then finally, they feel that partnering with the preceptors to discuss future research and other scholarly projects, it is both bring that to the forefront, and some of those are getting off the ground, but it's raising the level of practice for the preceptors. They're beginning to be engaged in the idea of let's evaluate some of the practices that we're doing. I lost control again. It won't let me go forward.
Okay, I'll move you forward.
All right, quickly. Disadvantages. It was the big thing. Faculty didn't want to give up that direct patient contact and direct student contact that they have for the most part. So part of the difficulty was role definition. I would say now we're in our fourth iteration of the PEP initiative, and faculty are getting more comfortable with that. I would say they would no longer necessarily identify this as a disadvantage because they are very much involved in evidence-based projects. They're able to facilitate clinical paperwork with students. That certainly is a perk that they're finding. So instead of going home at the end of a 8-hour clinical day and having 6 hours of clinical paperwork to do, they actually do it with the students during intra-clinical time. And so they're able to give lots of feedback to the students in person, as well as they typically have access to our online course platform, and they can check in and check students' work during the day as well. With preceptors, what they perceived as advantages to being a PEP preceptor, because we were able to pay them. And the only good thing that I think has come out of this financial crisis is that suddenly being a PEP preceptor is a good thing, because it typically is a commitment of 1, 2, or at the most 3 days a week of your day or of your week, whereas if you were precepting a new hire, that's a 5-day-a-week job. Well, the economic crisis, at least for Indianapolis, has pulled that perk out of the mix, because our preceptors are no longer getting overtime or extra pay for orienting a new hire. So suddenly being a student PEP preceptor really looks good. So that's been one of our good things. But anyway, our preceptors feel that this is a very much more reality-based experience that's going to prepare students for the role of the RN better than the traditional teaching model. They also feel like it provides for a concentrated experience with specific patients, medications, and treatments. They feel that resulted in increased knowledge and confidence on the students' part. They feel like it provides opportunities for students to practice skills multiple times, to improve clinical thinking skills and develop prioritization and organizational skills. So one of the key features to this is that students don't go the day before or the night before and pick their patient and do all the work that is in the traditional model. What they do is show up just like an RN. They show up that day for their clinical day, and whatever is handed to them is what they work with. And so suddenly they are forced to, silly things like, I know how to write down my care for 6 patients as opposed to the one patient that I had in a traditional model. I kind of talked about the concentrated exposure, but I think the last thing that they add is that they really feel that they are contributing to the development of the nurse of the future and their colleagues. And as an anecdote, one of the things that they've been telling me lately as this is rolled out, and now we actually just graduated our first PET student, is that this has been a wonderful trial period for the nurses to see, is this somebody who we would like to work with? On some of our PEP units, they mandated that if they would do this, that we would have students loop, meaning if they came 5th semester, that they would come back 6th semester and do that rotation again for med-surg. And so then those institutions have a full year for get student. Would she fit into our culture? Would she be a good colleague? And so it's been a wonderful thing. And I'm sorry, and I realize I'm taking up more time than I'm supposed to. Let me just very quickly with talking about the students' perceptions. I think one quote says it all. I had a student who said, if my choice was that I would come back to this PEP unit, and it was with a patient population she wasn't particularly enamored with and didn't plan to practice in, she said, if my choice was to come back here again to this PEP unit or go to a non-PEP unit in another area, I would come back to the PEP unit because it's been such an incredible experience. So you can read these, but they love it. I would tell you they have so much more confidence. They get to do things. Especially at 5th semester, and it's all about how many times can you do something. And I've done 6 of these, and I've given 3 shots, and I've done 14 Foleys. They're just ecstatic about the ability to actually contribute to the unit and contribute to care patients. So I'm in there, and I'm sorry for going over. So any questions or comments?
And this is what I think we'll do. Let's hold all the questions and comments until the end. I want Paul to have an opportunity to do her session because it's fabulous content and very relevant for the New Jersey work. I'm going to say, if you have time, just take your time and do your question because this is being archived. I'll say to the students and to the faculty, if you have commitments, I'll understand that we are due to, come to a halt at 2:30. But otherwise, we'll just keep going. And then those that have questions or comments, we can take them at the end. I'll stay and do that, or we'll you can send them either to the speaker or to me electronically, and we'll take it from there. So I think now Paul should have the control.
Yep.
Okay. You're on. And again, so as usual, kind of down to the wire, but let's just, we'll take it as it comes, Paula.
Okay. That's fine. All right. I'm going to talk to you about the clinical education model that's emerged from the Oregon Consortium for Nursing Education. And this has been an ongoing, actually 5-phase project that's supported by multiple grants, which are listed on this screen here. So important to note, it has been very well funded and includes a lot of volunteer time as well. So just briefly, in order to understand the context of how this model that I'm going to tell you about emerged, OCNE, the Oregon Consortium for Nursing Education, is a collaboration among 8 community colleges in Oregon and then all 5 campuses of Oregon Health Science University. We basically what we have is a shared curriculum with shared admission standards. Students are co-admitted. The college students can exit after they or associate degree and get licensed. But because they're co-admitted, they can also just continue on for their baccalaureate degree, and we've created 3 options that allow them to do that expeditiously. So, and now that's what the consortium is. What brought these parts together, and it is a group of organizations and people that didn't really collaborate before much, is that the realization that things were changing rapidly and we had a nursing shortage. Our population was getting older. We're all having a really hard time preparing nurses for the future. So we decided to pool our resources and come together, and that's how the consortium was born. So the shared curriculum, which the clinical education model is embedded in, but I'm going to focus on the clinical education model that we created. Basically, we've moved from relying on the age-old model, which is probably the same one we all were educated under, to a model that incorporates what we call 5 elements. And I'm going to talk briefly about the 5 elements of the model, so you have a sense of what each represents and what kinds of activities students are engaged in. So this slide gives a not the slide here as far as the colors, but in the middle we have clinical learning, and then on the perimeter I've created a little circle for each of the 5 elements that create the entire model. First model I want to talk about is what we call the concept-based element. And in concept-based learning, the students learn about a specific concept or diagnosis in clinical. So one of the primary purposes is, okay, I'm hearing a little noise.
Okay, but somebody does not have their line muted that should.
Okay. The purpose of concept-based learning experiences are really to support that pattern recognition, so helping students understand the normal trajectory of a particular health problem. If they understand the normal trajectory of a health problem, then they learn to notice when the expected pattern is present or not present, which isn't, and this really goes back to Dr. Tanner's clinical jump model, this notion of noticing, and concept-based clinical experiences are designed to specifically help students understand what the salient aspects of a illness or a health problem is, and learn to notice when things are not normal. I didn't want to do that. So basically, what happens is students don't engage in the activity of caring for patients, but on a unit or in an environment where there are patients. A concept is identified. For instance, it might be fluid electrolyte balance. So every student, or sometimes we pair students, are assigned to a patient who's got a problem with fluid and electrolytes. They would review the chart. They would study the diagnosis. They would interview the patient. They would probably assess the patient. While they were in the room, they may help the patient to the bathroom or do immediate needs, but they're not giving medications. They're not managing the patient throughout a shift. They're really there to study the patient. And then all of the students are studying the same problem. After several hours of this intensive study time, then the faculty conduct rounds, and each student or student pair presents their patients, the findings, maybe gives a review of the underlying problem that created the fluid and electrolyte balance. And the faculty make intentional efforts to help the students compare and contrast the various cases around the particular concept, so that students get an idea of what patterns are related to the particular problem. So there is this rounds and sharing information that occurs in this particular activity. And again, it involves real patients in an actual setting. Case-based element of the model is occurs not occur in usually the lab, and we embed simulation under the case-based element. We thought about calling simulation its own element, and then we came to the realization that high fidelity simulation is really a wonderful tool to teach in a case-based role, but a case-based way. But what we're really doing is creating scenarios that are use a case-based focus and the pedagogy associated with case-based learning. So in this element of the model, the focus is designing the activities to help the students think like learners through exposure to client case exemplars. Again, this happens in the lab and involves authentic clinical problems, tend to focus on highly prevalent practice situation, and case-based learning always encompasses seminar discussion, and sometimes it involves computer-based cases as well as simulation. Intervention skill-based focuses on the laboratory aspect of clinical education. So it's something we're all familiar with, but we acknowledge that we're really developing these intervention skill-based learning activities to focus on building the know-how and know-why of nursing practice. And we don't limit the notion of skills to psychomotor skills. So certainly that's important. We want students to have the opportunity to engage in repetitive practice over and over in the lab so that they become comfortable with the psychomotor aspects of a skill and can almost do it automatically. But we focus not just on learning how to give injections or take blood pressures, but also on the health teaching and coaching that a nurse does, interpersonal, professional communication skills. We might focus on skills related to delegation. Again, the focus is repetitive practice so that they get a sense of mastery of the particular skill that we're looking at. Direct focus client care is similar to what we've probably all talked about, maybe called total patient care. The difference is we acknowledge that we don't necessarily always want the students doing total patient care. We might direct exactly what they're going to do when we assign them to take care of a patient on the clinical unit. So again, this involves taking care of patients in real environments. They generally are assigned to take care of a patient, or they may choose a patient. And the purpose here is to get that progressive experience in the actual delivery of nursing care, and really focusing on understanding the role of developing relationships with patients and that therapeutic use of self. So it's that holistic, applying the skills that they've learned in lab, applying the thinking that they've learned in simulation to care for patients on units over the course of a shift in an authentic way. So, and again, it's a progressive experience that it gets integrated throughout the curriculum. The integrated practicum can actually occur at benchmark times in the curriculum. We have one program that has actually used integrated practicum at the end of the first year and then again at the end of the second year. This is where actually paired with a preceptor, and this again, the faculty typically is not on site but always available, making consistent and periodic visits to work with the student, but the nurse who has been trained to be, and we actually don't call them preceptors, we call them clinical teaching associates, because we sort of wanted to kind of raise the bar on really the importance of this role of these nurses that are functioning in this capacity. So, and again, this typically happens at the end of the program, and the purpose is really to facilitate also transition into practice. So really helping the student with their professional form, moving from the perception of I'm a student to I'm soon going to be a nurse. And again, it happens in the clinical learning environment. In reference to that triad that is integral to the PEP model. Well, that same triad is integral to the integrated practicum experience that we've created. And you'll see here on this slide, it should be slide 52, with two triangles. And we have the student and the client at the tip of the two triangles, and then the faculty and the CTA and the unit. So really the purpose of the integrated practicum is to link all of those players in the student's formation with really the CTA, the clinical team associate, is at the center of this model because they're linking the student with the client. They are helping the student integrate as a member of the profession in the unit from which they're situated. The faculty is important, but the CTA is really very central to making this clinical experience work in this element of our model. So again, we've tried to integrate the model or implement the model from a real curricular aspect, and this slide shows what the first year of the curriculum looks like in terms of how we're using these clinical experiences. So you see that the circles, size of the circles indicate that the students are doing lots of concept-based clinical experiences. They're doing some fair case-based, spending a lot of time and skill to get that mastery, that know-how, and they still do have some direct focused care experience as well in the first year. In the second year of the program, they have a lot more focused direct patient care experiences, but they're still involved in case-based, concept-based, and intervention skill-based experiences. And the third year of our curriculum, integrative experiences really take over. We have 2 quarters with a total of about 450 hours of integrative experiences when they finish the whole baccalaureate curriculum, which is happening more and more even for the students that begin in the community colleges. And again, they still have some intervention skill-based and concept-based and some case-based, mostly through simulation in that third year of the experience, but they're spending a lot more time with their CTAs and integrative experiences. So where we are with our model is we are in the process of full implementation of the model on 4 of our campuses. That would be 2 of our baccalaureate campuses, one in Portland and one in Ashland, and then 2 of our community college campuses that we're implementing. And that is funded through a FIPSI grant with the first year of implementation, and we are doing a comprehensive evaluation. We've created all kinds of tools which are pretty interesting, but we're monitoring the time spent by students, faculty, and staff nurses in this new model. And it's basically based on some things that we alluded to in the NLN study. We did kind of our own pre-study in the first phase of this project, and we learned that students were standing around a lot, that we got all kinds of anecdotal information from faculty, staff, and from students that there was a lot of downtime because we were waiting for faculty to, kind of run around and make sure that they could adequately supervise. We also learned that staff nurses were feeling burdened by the clinical model. So we've developed these surveys that are monitoring the issues that we identified in phase 1 of our project over time to try to determine if that's changing. And we have with 2 control sites too. So we're using those surveys on a couple of some cohorts that are using the traditional model of clinical education, and then our 4 demonstration projects. We're using a clinical competency scale, and again, we'll be comparing the outcomes of our control group with our experimental group, and then we have some OCNI competencies. OCNI is a competency-based curriculum, so we've developed some instruments to measure the attainment of the OCNI competencies using this clinical education model that we've developed. And another huge project, but involves multi-sites and collaboration by our commitment to the health of Oregonians and of leadership and a lot of persistence and kind of one leap of faith after another. I think that's it for me.
Okay, great. Well, Paula, that was wonderful, and thank you again for sharing all of this. And there's some information in the so let's just open the questions. Open up now raise your hand. We won't open the line. So we'll open up for questions for Paula or Angie. Anybody that would to that, please feel free. And Claire raised hand, and we'll call on her in a minute. But I would particularly like to encourage the people who have not asked questions thus far, and I think there are several schools of nursing from whom we have not had scholars asking questions, and also the people who have done clinical teaching. This would be a great time to get your questions answered. So I'm going to have a call on Claire. So go ahead, Claire.
My question relates to the limitations on the faculty-student ratios set forth in the Nurse Practice Act of the state. In looking at the model for the PEP, I saw there were 7 faculty and 120 students. We have a 1-to-10 ratio in New Jersey, so that would need to be addressed. And it sounds like the faculty are not always on site with the student. That's another requirement that we have in New Jersey that would make this difficult to implement. I use a similar model in teaching a critical care elective clinical course with my students where we're using trained, we call them preceptors, and the students go to at least 2 critical care units for the clinical component of the course. This course is a little bit different in that it's front-loaded with the didactic content, and then the last half of the semester is the concentrated clinical, but the students really seem to like this method of learning where they're working with the same nurses in the units for a period of time. Up now.
Okay. I guess Angie or Paula, do you want to address the issue of the board regs and the ratios?
I had some difficulty with her system. She's going to be calling back in a moment.
Oh,
okay.
This is Paula. I can address it. Angie had mentioned that one of the resources they used was, it actually isn't the Oregon Consortium for Nursing Education, it's the University of Portland, created DEU. And I know the way they're dealing with their issue is the faculty or the preceptors, the CTAs, they call them something else, I can't remember what, they actually get a faculty appointment that's approved by the Board of Nursing. So that's the way they've really created a different model of thinking about clinical education. The faculty are in a supervisory coaching role, faculty that are with the School of Nursing, and the staff nurses are all at least BSN prepared, which you have to be in Oregon to teach clinical, and they get a faculty appointment that's approved by the Board of Nursing.
Okay. So I'm just to keep us moving ahead. Claire, did that answer your questions?
You need a minimum of a master's degree to be appointed faculty in New Jersey, so we would need some adjustments in order to do that.
Yeah, some policy issues here, too. How about some of the scholars? What's on mind here? That while we have these 2 wonderful clinical education leaders.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. We're just calling for some questions, and I'm hoping some scholars speak up. I have Patty. Patty, want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes. I was just wondering, and again, as a novice, I'm just trying to whittle my way through the nurse practitioner program. I'm right now trying to develop a curriculum as well, and in relation to what has worked and what is not necessarily working any longer, I'm trying to think of different ways to facilitate not just nurses, but nurses that are actually proficient, rather than having that huge learning curve once you graduate and that frustration among staff and the nurses themselves of not feeling like you know what you're doing. And where nursing has, I'm not going to say failed, but has not required enough of the students, and then most other graduation programs, there's an internship required for graduation. So not just is the faculty's responsibility to facilitate these learning experiences, but they should utilize the time in the summers to work, a nurse at a hospital or a nursing home, what have you, to give themselves an opportunity to see all these experiences that may help with the technical skills, even though they can't give out medications. But there's a lot of technical skills and patient skills that are necessary that go along with nursing as well.
we certainly encourage our undergrad students to work as SNEs, and we've even toyed with the idea of meaning that they become CNAs before they apply to the program. It's a little tough to implement, but I think your idea is great, and in some ways I see that even at the master's program. Sometimes we have, at least I know that's less true for the nurse practitioners programs, but for some of our CNS programs, we have students in those programs who aren't practicing in that designated area, and to create some type of internship where they have an immersion beyond their clinical components of their coursework, I think would be ideal and better prepare them for that role.
And Pam, and I would refer you to this literature. It's probably now even 5, 7 years old, but has been pushes for that internship model, and it's been evidence about its pros and cons. So I kind of refer you there for more information. I'm to now move ahead. Andrew has a question.
I was looking at some research regarding like nurse residencies, and I guess that kind of goes along with Patty's question in regards to, has any of the programs looked to, you've now made these collaborations with hospitals for your actual clinicals, but maybe the last semester really immersing the student in a potential nurse residency program where you've now, with the Oregon model, did preachers or whatever you may have maybe them, and maybe allowing students to say, hey, this is a hospital that I could see myself at, and allowing them in their last clinical to really do more of a residency where they're going maybe even more than just 3 days a week, rehabbing that nurse, if any of your schools have looked into programs along those lines.
This is Paula from Oregon. Well, basically, that's what our integrated practicum experience is. It happens over six months, a total of 6 months, and it depends on if it's a baccalaureate or a community college student. But they spend a total of 6 months in basically a residency program that is still, the faculty is ultimately responsible for overseeing the experience and evaluating it. So they get a grade and ultimately the school, but it involves a partnership with not only the CTA but the unit. We've only graduated to one class from the baccalaureate system, and unfortunately, it happened during, economy, so our grads aren't getting jobs as quickly as they were a couple of years ago. But
the outcomes are kind of harder to test.
So it's harder to test. But what we're hearing from our employers is that from these programs are taking less time to orient through the post-licensure residency program because of basically the pre-licensure residency program.
That answers my question. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? We have Control, Farrell, or Nick?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Well, I'll leave the notion of questions. People raise your hand, and I'll call on you. I'm just going to quickly kind of wrap up here. We have there's Paula's website, so please feel free to go see that. We have presented for you 4 challenges. We're not going to have time to deal with them today, but I would say you could pull out a piece of paper and take the challenge yourself, and then maybe discuss it with your mentor, or if you're having a class session or working with your mentor or faculty member, maybe you'd like to use these as boards for further discussion. But look at them because they are real life. Both Paula and Angie and I all of us have been there and done that with these challenges. So take a look at them, and particularly those of you who are coming new to clinical teaching. And again, if you have questions, now's the time to raise them. I'm going to keep talking. Here, the post-session follow-up, as I mentioned, was the debate, and I've made the assignments of affirmative and negative. I'll draw to your attention that the people who have posted already have been using high-level evidence, drawn from literature. But we know that evidence can come from many places, even intuition and experience. So I am not expecting that everybody spends hours digging out literature, although if you are inspired to do so please feel free. But what I would love to see out there is as many different affirmative and negative answers as we can to that debate. So please get in there and kind of, give us some thinking here about the pros and cons of the issue. So that's what that's all about. And one interesting thing about debates when they're assigned, you may have to argue a point that you don't believe if you're assigned to a negative and you really think it has a positive. So it forces you to do some thinking beyond your experience limit. Okay, I said we're going to meet on the 16th face-to-face, and I'm looking forward, now that I know you all better, to seeing your faces again. So we'll look forward to being together. I know Seton Hall will not be able to jump there doing their research day, but I'll look forward to, and we'll provide the information for them. Okay, and a big thanks to everybody. Thank you, Farrell, for bearing with us, and Nick for helping us go along, and Angie and Paula, you were fabulous as expected, so thank you so much for that. And I want the scholars and the faculty, next time you are at the National League for Nursing Summit or any other these educated meetings that go along, Angie and Paula are there, please come up and introduce yourselves to them, because they will, I'm sure would love to have a face with your name too. So I think we expected that. We expected success and we had it. So thanks for sticking with the time frame here, a little extension, and Phil and Nick too. So any other last questions or comments? We'll entertain them. Otherwise, we're going to, I think we can close off the recording. Anything else anybody wants to do or say?
Very much. I enjoyed it, so it was
good. So. It is fun.
Thank you very much.
Promote me to host.
And Angie and Paula, you saw the smiley faces up there.
Yeah. Having to look a little closer to see what they were.
I think that's what they are.
Yeah.